To you, who probably have 100 tabs of thoughts open in your mind, thank you for deciding to open one more tab and choosing to spend it with me. I hope the sound from this tab will be gentle enough for you to momentarily close the others. And I'm Who. Thank you for joining my 6th podcast. Everyone, it's starting to feel like autumn in Hue these days. This afternoon, the wind is a bit chilly. The kind of weather where you just step out onto the balcony and feel autumn's breath creeping into your clothes. The city begins to slow down, people rush home. And the streetlights have just flickered on, a warm yellow glow, but enough to evoke a certain sense of loneliness. Perhaps that's why I always find evenings like these make people think more than usual, especially when they're alone. I don't know when these quiet moments started making me feel such profound loneliness. Sitting and watching the traffic go by, hearing the wind whistle through the window, my heart suddenly feels heavy. It's unclear whether I'm sad or just missing something from the past. I used to think loneliness meant having no one by my side. But the older I get, the more I understand that sometimes, loneliness is when you're surrounded by people, yet your heart still feels empty. When I was a child, this was my favorite season because of the gentle chill. I'd wear long sleeves and warm clothes, going to school early in the light cold, shivering slightly as I walked. Every evening, I'd gather with friends, carefree. Now, with autumn's arrival, although I still love it, for me, autumn also carries a sadness that's hard to define. It's like suddenly realizing that all the people who once shared so many seasons with me are no longer here. As we mature, don't you think people become less aware of their loneliness? Until you're sitting in an afternoon like this, when the wind gently brushes your hair, when you watch the sunset fade, that's when you feel unusually small. That feeling, suspended between being okay and not okay, is so hard to name yet terrifyingly familiar. I used to think growing up meant becoming stronger, less sensitive, less prone to overthinking. But it turns out that's not the case. The older I get, the more I understand my emotions, but I no longer express them as easily as before. I choose silence more often, choose to hide unhappy things, choose to say I'm fine even when deep down I'm not fine at all. There was a time I thought everyone must feel this way. Everyone has had moments of sitting silently, looking out the window, feeling sad for no apparent reason. Everyone has wanted to call someone, but then stopped, fearing they'd be a bother. Everyone has wanted to share something, but then kept it to themselves. Autumn or winter, I don't know why, always makes people feel more vulnerable than usual. Perhaps it's because the cold makes us crave warmth, but that warmth no longer comes from others. It's something I have to learn to create for myself. On cold evenings, I wrap myself in a blanket, hug myself, and tell myself that everything will be all right. But sometimes, even that phrase sounds strangely lonely, everyone. For me, loneliness isn't just when we have no one by our side. It's when I begin to realize that no one truly understands what I'm going through. It's when conversations become more superficial, relationships gradually grow distant, and I try to cling to a little connection, knowing it's not the same anymore. Once, I read a quote like this: "The older you get, the smaller your circle of friends becomes, and the wider the emptiness in your heart." At the time, I thought it was clever but didn't fully understand it. Now I truly feel the truth of that statement, because every time you lose someone you were once close to, you feel the quietness in your heart more clearly. It's not the clamor of arguments, but an unending silence. It's like I know everything has passed, but somewhere deep inside, there's still an empty space I don't know how to fill. I think loneliness in adulthood is a very special kind of loneliness. It's not intense, it doesn't make you collapse. Instead, it subtly and persistently creeps into every empty space in your day. Perhaps when you get home late from work, when you eat dinner alone, when you open your phone but don't know who to text. But it's strange, the older I get, the less I resist that feeling. I'm no longer afraid of it as I once was, but simply sit with it like an old friend. Perhaps it's because I understand that loneliness isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a necessary pause for me to look back at myself, to understand what I need, what I lack, and who is truly important in my life. I'm recording this podcast on an autumn afternoon in Hue. The later it gets in the evening, the colder it becomes. I've gone and made myself a hot cup of tea, and suddenly I had a thought. Perhaps someone in another corner of the city is feeling a bit like me, a little empty, a little vague, and a little peaceful inside. And who knows, maybe if we just admit, yes, I am lonely, that loneliness will become a little less scary. Right. I once heard someone say that as you grow up, you don't really lose anyone. It's just that some people no longer walk the same path as you. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But you only understand it once you've experienced it. It turns out the hardest part isn't breaking up with someone, but accepting that they still exist somewhere in this world, just no longer connected to you. I used to have a very close group of friends in college. We'd hang out, eat, and talk about everything every day. But after graduation, each of us went our separate ways. One moved far away for work, one got busy with their job, one found a partner. At first, everyone promised to keep in touch, to meet up again. But then texts became fewer, calls became sparser, to the point where after a year, no one proactively talked like before. And you know what? What made me sad wasn't losing friends, but realizing that even friendship has an expiration date. The truth is, all of us have had relationships that were once very close, but then faded away without us realizing it. We still follow each other, still react to each other's stories, but we no longer share deep things. We're all busy, all tired, and all will have new priorities in life. No one is wrong. It's just that as we grow up, everything changes. And that feeling, that realization that a relationship that once meant so much to you has now become just an acquaintance. It hurts, but in a quiet way. It's not an outward kind of pain where you cry loudly. It's just one day, you see them online, laughing with a different group of friends, their new connections, and you suddenly understand in your heart that your place in their life is no longer what it once was. I think that's the scary part of loneliness in adulthood, when you realize that no matter how hard you try, you can't hold on to everything forever. People change, circumstances change, and so do you. But what makes us lonely isn't losing others. It's not having learned how to not feel empty when that happens. And it's not just in friendships. Loneliness also appears in love. I'm sure many of you listening to this podcast have experienced the feeling after a breakup once or several times, right? When someone leaves, and you have to learn to live on without them by your side. A few years ago, I went through a breakup. At that time, I felt like my whole world had collapsed, crying until my eyes were swollen, with no desire to eat or drink. Every morning I woke up, my heart felt heavy. But as time passed, the pain gradually subsided. I no longer cried as much, no longer felt that choking sensation. I just started to feel a very strange emptiness in my heart. Every evening, when I returned to my familiar room, everything was so quiet you could hear the clock's hands ticking each second. No one texted to ask, "Have you eaten yet? Was work tiring today?" No more goodnight messages before bed. At first, I thought I had gotten used to coming home alone, used to taking care of myself, used to the silence. But later, I realized that getting used to it was actually just my way of trying to endure. My way of always comforting myself, saying it's okay, it's okay. Some late nights, I just wanted to pick up the phone and call someone, not necessarily to say much, just to hear a voice other than my own. But then I'd stop, because I wouldn't know how to start, how to express the loneliness I was going through for someone to understand. Sometimes, the scariest thing after a breakup isn't the pain itself, but the days that follow, when everything becomes quiet, and you realize there's no one on the other end anymore. There's one thing I took a very long time to realize. I wasn't lonely because I had no one by my side, but because I hadn't gotten used to living by myself. All of us are learning. Learning not to depend on others' emotions, learning not to let someone's absence make us lose our way. But no matter how much we learn, it's still difficult, because humans are born to connect, aren't we? After a long, tiring day, there's that empty feeling when there's no one to lean on, no one to tell about your day, no one to share those tiny little things you used to be so eager to talk about. And there are times when I ask myself, am I really okay, or am I just pretending to be okay? But gradually, I've found that learning to live alone isn't about becoming cold or isolated, but about understanding myself better, knowing what I need, what I want, and being calm enough when no one else is by my side. Because in the end, no matter how long someone walks with you, there will always be paths you have to walk alone. And if we can find peace even when we're by ourselves, that's when we truly no longer fear loneliness. For a while, I easily felt lost in the very life I had created. Back then, just a few friends were enough to make me happy. Now, even with hundreds of followers, a job that provides a stable income, and everything else, I still have evenings when I don't know who to confide in. Everyone has their own concerns. And so do I many times. I've asked myself if I'm too closed off. Because there were opportunities for me to open up and connect, but I chose to avoid them. When someone invited me for coffee, I made excuses about being busy. When someone asked how I was, I gave a dismissive answer. I was afraid of getting too close and then losing them, afraid of telling my story and not being understood. So, I created distance and then complained about being lonely. That's when I realized that loneliness doesn't necessarily come from not having anyone around, but from my hesitation to let others truly see the real me. We wear masks to be loved, but then those very masks prevent anyone from truly loving us. We choose to maintain an image of being okay to reassure others, but in doing so, we isolate ourselves. And the more we try to appear strong, the greater the loneliness becomes. I've noticed that friends around my age and older often brace themselves, always trying to endure their sadness and unspoken difficulties alone instead of voicing them. People often think that growing up means having to hide all your emotions, but actually, that's not true. For me, growing up means learning to choose the right people to share with. Not everyone will understand you, but somewhere, I still believe there are people willing to listen. It's just a matter of whether you dare to speak up. I remember not too long ago, a friend sent me a message one evening. I just texted an old friend I hadn't talked to in ages, and surprisingly, they still remembered me as much as before. I asked, "Why did you text them?" And my friend replied very simply, "I was tired of not talking to anyone, so I thought I'd try. Who knew it would feel so good?" I smiled when I heard that. Because it turns out often, my loneliness only needs a small step to be soothed. Daring to speak, daring to reconnect, daring to admit that, oh, I really miss them. I think no one can completely escape loneliness. But amidst that loneliness, if you can still send a text, make a phone call, or simply listen to someone speak, then at least you still have a desire to be close, to connect with someone, even just a little. At some point, people realize that loneliness isn't something that can be cured, but something you have to learn to live with. It will always be there, accompanying you through each day, each phase, when you're happy, when you're tired, when you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I once read a beautiful quote: "A lonely person isn't someone who has no one, but someone who doesn't know what to do with their own loneliness." That sentence made me think for a long time because I found it so true. No one escapes loneliness, but some people let it swallow them whole, while others learn to turn it into a break. And the difference between these two ways lies only in how you confront it. Loneliness isn't an enemy if you know how to live with it. There are very small things that help me feel closer to myself. Sometimes, I'll write in my journal, take an afternoon walk, tidy up my room, or simply sit in silence and let my emotions pass. I don't always need to fill the void. Sometimes, just letting it exist helps me see myself more clearly. Oh, let me tell you a story. There was this woman who worked at a very large media company. Her job was stable, her income good, but she fell into a state where she no longer felt joy, even though she was surrounded by many people. She said that at first, she tried very hard, signing up for dance classes, art classes, traveling, but the joy only lasted a few days, then she'd return to emptiness. Then one day, she decided to see a therapist. On her first session, she cried profusely. Not because something big had happened, but because it was the first time someone truly listened to her, without judgment, without interruption. After a few sessions, she began to understand herself better. It turned out her loneliness wasn't just due to a lack of others, but because she had been living against her own emotions for so long. She tried to appear strong, tried to be happy so as not to be seen as weak, but the more she tried, the less she loved herself. Reading that, I felt both pity and empathy. Because I know many of us live that way, bracing ourselves to be okay, to appear okay, so others won't worry, but forgetting to take care of ourselves. I began to understand that living with loneliness doesn't mean enduring it, but learning to be gentler with yourself. Sometimes, just changing a few small things can make life much more pleasant. For example, setting new boundaries for myself, stopping the need to please everyone, proactively contacting people who make me feel peaceful, even if it's just texting, "How are you?" Spending time on hobbies isn't about forgetting loneliness, but about filling the void with things that make me feel alive. And most importantly, allowing myself to be weak, to be sad, to be tired, not always having to pretend I'm okay. No one in this world will completely escape loneliness, everyone. Some people are lonely in a crowd, while others find peace in their own solitude. The important thing is how you perceive and confront it. In reality, all of us are learning to befriend our own loneliness. Some use music, some take evening strolls around the city, some bury themselves in work. And no matter the method, as long as you don't run away, sooner or later you'll find a small peace somewhere in your heart. Because in the end, perhaps loneliness isn't necessarily an enemy. It's just a reminder that you still have emotions, still need to connect, still alive. And that, in its own unique way, is beautiful, isn't it? In the past, I often felt heavy-hearted, tormented by the things I'd lost in my life. But now I'm a bit older, you see, and sometimes I think about many things, about youth, about the people who have passed through my life, and about who I am now. The feeling now is strange. The more I think, the calmer I feel. Perhaps after many struggles, I no longer want to fight against loneliness. Instead, I learn to sit with it like an old friend visiting. Not trying to force conversation, just sitting together is enough. Growing up has taught me many things, but the clearest lesson is that no one can completely alleviate my loneliness. Others can accompany me, but they cannot live my emotions for me. I can have a partner, friends, a good job, but there will still be moments of emptiness that no one understands. And that's not wrong. People only truly understand themselves when they dare to go through those quiet moments. Nights when no one texts, days eating alone, afternoons leaving work with no one to hang out with. All those moments, they sound sad, don't they? But they are also when we hear our hearts most clearly. So many people are afraid of loneliness that they choose to throw themselves into work, into relationships, into social media to fill it. But after filling it, then what? It's still empty. Because what I'm lacking now isn't other people, but a connection with myself. Actually, for me, loneliness isn't bad. It's only scary when I let it turn into isolation or when I intentionally deny it. But if I learn to embrace it, it can become something that helps us grow, become gentler, and understand our own emotions and those of others. Just like winter, it's cold, yes, but thanks to that cold, we appreciate the warm, sunny days more, don't we? Back then, I used to think happiness was when I was no longer lonely. But now, I understand it differently. Happiness is when I can smile even when I'm lonely. There are some empty spaces that need to be filled with self-love. So, understand and embrace yourself more, okay? And I truly want to say this to everyone. And more than that, it's a reminder to myself too. If we are lonely and feel lonely, remember that we are not at fault or a failure. It's just that we are in a phase where our soul needs rest, needs to be listened to. Take time for the small things you once overlooked. A morning coffee, a favorite song, a half-read book, an old friend you haven't spoken to in a long time. These are small things, but if done with a sincere heart, I believe they will warm your heart. And don't forget that others may not fully understand you, but they can still love you in their own way. Whether little or a lot, I believe there are people listening, waiting for you to speak up. You just need to open your heart a little, take a small step out of the silent zone. Not to end loneliness, but to see that you were never truly alone. One day, as you walk on a windy road or sit watching the sunset slowly descend over the city, you will understand that loneliness isn't as scary as it once was. It's just a part of this life. Like winter needs to be part of the year, so that when spring arrives, you appreciate the first rays of sunlight even more. I truly hope that by then you will smile and say, growing up isn't so bad after all. As long as I know how to love myself, loneliness isn't that scary, is it? And that's the end of today's podcast. It's time to close this tab. I hope today's tab has helped you organize some thoughts or simply given you a breathing space. Now you can return to your other tabs more gently. Goodbye and see you next time you open a tab.